Hello everyone, my name is Nicole Fegan and I watched 113 films last year. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my 15 favorite films that I watched for the first time last year. This is not a video about films that came out in 2020 because I only saw maybe 3 of those and didn't especially like any of them. Instead, we're going to talk about mostly old films and just gush about some really good ones. Up first, for 5 honorable mentions, I was originally going to make this video my top 20, but figured that would be too long, so we have Aguirre, The Wrath of God, Fargo, 5 Easy Pieces, Paris is Burning, and A Serious Man. All amazing films, just didn't quite crack the top 15. At number 15, we have Lost Highway, directed by David Lynch, and I have like little notes for myself, and it took me so long to write down what I thought about this film. Maybe more than any other David Lynch thing I've consumed, I think this film is more of a feeling than the story, because the story is really what I had trouble with. It is about, let's see, a jazz musician getting tapes of himself sent to his home, and also a mechanic who falls for the daughter of a client. But that's not what the film's about at all, really. This film kind of meshes together and confuses like dream and reality and memory, and it is thrilling when it needs to be, it's very human when it needs to be, it's confusing when it needs to be, and more than anything I do just have this like eerie, cool feeling when I think about this film, more than thinking about what a great story that was. Moving on, at number 14, we have Heat, directed by Michael Mann. And this is a film that might be like technically perfect in all of its aspects. This is one of the rare films that features both Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, and they are both just at like the peak of their acting performance in this film. Funnily, the film follows these 2 people at like the height of their craft. One of them is this criminal who does all these heists, and the other one is this detective. And there's this mutual respect that they have because obviously the detective is going after the criminal, but like, probably in one of the best scenes of the film, the 2 just have coffee together, and like it's so clear that they respect how talented the other is at what they're doing. And I think then it's perfect that you have like 2 of the most popular famous actors of all time just like absolutely crushing it. The colors in this film are also so rich, the story is just so neat, and like everything happens exactly as it has to happen. Like, I enjoyed this film obviously, but I'm equally as impressed by it as I am enjoying it, if that makes any sense. At number 13, we had the film that made me cry the most this year, and maybe the most of any film ever, and that is Grave of the Fireflies, directed by Isao Takahata. This is about 2 children in Japan in World War II, Seita and Setsuko, as they are orphaned because their mother dies during the war, and they basically just have to try to survive. They kind of shelter in this little cave by a river, and Seita, who's the older brother, is just trying to get food for his younger sister, and like you watch these 2 as they're like kind of withering away, and like you're watching the film the whole time knowing that like there's no way this turns out well for them, and yet like you're clinging to hope that like something will go right for them. And like, no spoiler alert here, it obviously doesn't, and it's just like it's so heartbreaking the way it unfolds. Plus the animation style is just beautiful, the way the Fireflies look, the way the characters look. I think it's one of the most visually stunning films I watched all year. At number 12, we have Before Sunset, directed by Richard Linklater, which is the second in the Before trilogy. In the first film of the Before trilogy, these 2 20-somethings, Jesse and Celine, meet on a train and have like this kind of like magical romantic night, and then this film takes place 9 years later. I don't really want to spoil what's happened in the past 9 years in case you haven't seen the first film, but I think the first one, because of their age, it's flirty and it's fun, and like it's so dialogue heavy, but like it's clear that they're just like trying to impress each other, and like Jesse has like these like faux intellectual monologues that are like so endearing to watch, but at the same time it's like, come on dude. And I think what this film does so well is like it's obviously dialogue heavy as well, like most of the movie is just the 2 of them talking, but you have like this really flirty atmosphere with some added maturity. Yet what I have in my notes is perfect mix of flirty and maturity and memory and sweetness. And it feels like a homecoming to the characters, clearly that like they're getting to talk, and it feels like a homecoming to the viewer getting to like watch them reconnect. I guess that is a spoiler. Whatever, it's like watching them talk to each other for like an hour and a half again. It's just like a really wholesome feeling. At number 11, speaking of spoilers, we have The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, directed by Andrew Dominik. You guessed it, this film is about the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Jesse James is the head of this gang who do like heists in the 1880s, and Robert Ford is kind of an up-and-comer who has heard of like the myth of Jesse James and has wanted to join them for a while and joins them basically. The film begins with this voiceover that's just some of the best writing I've ever witnessed in a film, and they're like, it's just so, it looks so beautiful and it's intense, and you just watch, it's also very long, and I think that is a benefit to this film because you're watching these two characters kind of rise and fall throughout the whole film. Because Jesse James like is this notorious figure, kind of everyone knows who he is, and watching Robert Ford be kind of enamored of that mystique and like watching kind of like the veil be pulled back, and then obviously when the titular assassination happens, seeing what happens to both of their legacies is really, really fascinating. At number 10, we have The Last Black Man in San Francisco, directed by Joe Talbot. This is about a man named Jimmy who is living in San Francisco, and he wants to reclaim the house that his grandfather built that I think is like being put up for sale to other people, and he's like, no, this, like, my grandfather built this house, like this is basically my house. One of the things I love about movies as an art form is I think movies, more than maybe any other form of art, knows how to like make the setting a character, and I think San Francisco in this film just has such a large presence. Like there's two main characters, and then I would say San Francisco is the third main character, if not even like the biggest main character.
So in this next section, I go into talking about a quote that I really love from the movie, but I completely botched the quote and then thus did this like really stupid and inaccurate analysis of it. The real quote that I love is, "You don't get to hate San Francisco, you don't get to hate it unless you love it." I misremembered it as, "You don't get to love it unless you hate it," which is also cool, but not as cool. Basically, all I want to point out is that this quote is really interesting. This film has so much to say about like gentrification and calling a place home, and I do think it's true that like you don't get to actually hate a place unless you love it. It's kind of, I feel like the same thing was almost said in like Lady Bird, where like she's complaining all the time about Sacramento, but like that guidance counselor calls her out and is like, dude, you totally love Sacramento. And a similar thing is happening in this movie. So hello from editing, Nicole. Old Nicole was stupid. Let's keep going.
Moving on to number 9, we have Persona, directed by Ingmar Bergman. This is about an actress named Elizabeth who is kind of being taken care of by this nurse named Alma, and they go off to this cottage so that Elizabeth can kind of recover from her mental health struggles. Slowly throughout the film, both the viewer and the characters themselves kind of realize that their personalities are merging and that something kind of funky is going on. I think it's clear in like all my videos about films that usually what I'm drawn to in film is like very, very human stories, things that are rooted in experience. But this film is so deeply psychological. I think it's a psychological drama to a T. I think it like takes mental health and I was just gonna say persona, wow, yeah, and like how you present yourself to that like very psychological Freudian element and explores that on those levels, which is something that I think I appreciated a lot more than I expected to. At number 8, we have Down by Law, directed by Jim Jarmusch, who is my favorite director of all time. I am just slowly making my way through his films, and this one is amazing. I'm just gonna read the letterbox description because they do it perfectly. A disc jockey, a pimp, and an Italian tourist escape from jail in New Orleans. There you go. Jim Jarmusch is basically like the king of let's take these humans and put them in a film and just watch what they would actually do. Because this is just so human, it is so funny, it is so touching. Just like watching these like 3 oddball people in this jail cell and doing all this stuff together. And yet like on a more emotional side, I do feel like you kind of get to watch these like roads converge and diverge. The final shot of the film is actually, I believe, this like diverging road, Robert Frost style, and like watching these stories connect and disconnect is like really heartbreaking. And yet it's not heartbreaking at all because like that's what life is, and life is so beautiful, and I think Jim Jarmusch just loves how beautiful life is. Even these like wacky characters can share these beautiful moments together, and I think that's what I always appreciate about his films, and I think he does that really, really well in this one. At number 7, we have La Jetee, directed by Chris Marker, and this is one of the most unique films I have watched in my entire life, probably. This is 28 minutes long. It is almost entirely told in still photos, except for like 2 or 3 little moving GIFs, if you will. This is a post-apocalyptic story post-World War III as some scientists are trying to figure out time travel, and that leads us to our protagonist, who has this one core memory tying him to his pre-war life, which is this memory of being a kid and seeing this beautiful woman on a pier. And so this entire story is just told in voiceover as we're seeing these snapshots. The man time traveling back, he actually falls in love with the woman, and seeing how the scientists react and everything that happens to this man. And I think just this sweeping story being told in these very simplistic terms. Again, the movie is so short, it's told in these snapshots. I think it redefines kind of what films can be. And I think I appreciate that it had such a cohesive narrative, despite not having a lot of the trappings of traditional films. Nothing's moving, the camera is stagnant. I don't know, I just think it's so smart, and yet the story was written so well. And those moments also when the camera moves, they're so infrequent. I actually think there might have only been one, I might be lying about this. It just it is chilling, literal goosebumps from just someone blinking in one of the shots. At number 6, we have Do the Right Thing, directed by Spike Lee, which I should have watched years ago and finally got around to, and it is just as good as everyone says it is. This film is basically a portrait of a community. It's not really about the town, it's not really about one or two individuals, it is about a whole community, because the plot is that there is an Italian-owned pizzeria in this primarily black Brooklyn neighborhood, and one of the people in the community notices that all the pictures on the wall of the pizzeria are of Italian actors, and he's like, if you're in this black neighborhood, maybe you should have some black actors on your walls instead of just Italian people. And obviously that's an interesting question, but more than anything, I think it just leads to this portrait of this community, and kind of seeing how all of the moving parts respond to the tension that rises from this conflict. And without giving too much away, because this is kind of the climax of the film, but I do think this film has so much to say about police brutality that remains so relevant today, and about anger. Right after watching a film, I kind of look up to see what other people say about a film, and one of the biggest questions people ask is about whether someone in this film is justified about inciting a certain kind of violence. And it's just so funny to me, because if you're watching this film and that's the question you have, your priorities are so skewed, I don't even know what to tell you. So yeah, I clearly think it's relevant, and I think there's merit to films having relevance, but also just as a film, it's so well made. The colors are so rich, the characters are so fleshed out, and just again, this portrait of a community I find very, very beautiful. At number 4, we have Inside Llewyn Davis, directed by the Coen brothers, and I think I actually watched this on January 1st last year, so we started off with a bang. This is about a folk musician in the 1960s, and you're just watching him struggle. He clearly has the talent to be one of Dylan's contemporaries, but he is just not catching a single break. This film is gray, this film is bleak. It isn't even depressing, because it's just, again, it's a very gray film, both in visuals and kind of in tone. And yet throughout all of that, it's a very truthful story, and it's funny in the moments when it has to be funny, because the reality of reality is that funny things happen even in depressing lives all the time. And I just found it very moving, the way it felt so real. Oscar Isaac plays our main guy, Llewyn Davis, and I think he does just an incredible job in this. And yeah, I think kind of a very different tone for the Coen brothers. It's not a black comedy, and it's not, yeah, it's not doing anything too fancy. It's just very on the screen. Very good. At number 4, we have Yi Yi, directed by Edward Yang, which was just always gonna be one of my favorite films the second I saw it, and it lived up to its promise. This is a slice of life film about a family in Taipei, and you just kind of watch all of the moving pieces of this family. There's no overarching plot, you're just watching people, which is clearly my favorite type of film. I think I'm most impressed by how this film gets its themes across. There's kind of this back of someone's head motif, and it leaves you with these questions, or these thoughts of we only lead one life and we can only see it through our eyes, and what are the thousands of other perspectives happening around us. The young son in this film, he takes on this project of taking photos of the back of people's heads, because you can't see the back of your head, and just to see this wisdom from this young character is just so absolutely moving and mind-blowing. There's also kind of this thread of do lives repeat? Not in a reincarnation way, but there are these two older characters who are talking about their love story, and meanwhile, while he's talking about this, you see these like two younger characters kind of going through all the same motions, like standing on a street corner and holding hands, and like what does it mean for our lives if the beats of our lives repeat? I don't know, it's just like very moving. Again, with all these films, it's just like so human, so tender, and has so much to say. Time to get weird again. At number 3 we have Mulholland Drive, directed by David Lynch, which was so good. Oh my god. Very, very, very simply, a blonde woman goes to LA, who is an actress, to audition for some things, and she meets a brunette woman who has amnesia, and together they try to figure out who the brunette woman is. This is not what the film is about at all. To tell you about all the moving pieces would take too long, and also it doesn't even matter. What I love about this film is that, like, clearly, like, the answers and clarity in the plot are, like, important or whatever, but I also feel like the confusion is a key element of the film. I like film analysis. Obviously, I look up films after I watch them. Immediately after watching this, I went to Letterboxd. I wrote a review that basically explained everything. If you watch this and you're confused and want to know what happened, I think, like, the most liked review on Letterboxd is, like, a brilliant analysis of what happened. But when you're watching, there are all of these moving threads. The thing is so dreamlike. There are moments of just, like, bone-chilling, not absurdity, but I do feel like confusion is so key to this film. It's like David Lynch doesn't even want you to look for answers at certain points. You could, and if you found the answers, good for you, but at the same time, like, there's something so visceral about these moments of, like, a flash of electric blue, or like the names of characters changing, or a timeline changing, or meeting characters that you haven't seen before and just like expecting that you'll understand whatever the hell is going on. And I kind of respect that about the film, that like it's not going to hand feed you easy things. It's gonna present this story that is so dreamlike and convoluted and say, enjoy! And guess what? I did. At number 2, we have Stalker, directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, which I gave a 4.5 star when I first watched it, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since, and now it's my second favorite film I watched last year.
I lost so much footage, and I am so embarrassed. I heard my camera click off at one point, and then like continued after that, but it must have stopped filming like 3 to 4 minutes before it clicked, so hello from the editing table again. Stalker, directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, is about a post-apocalyptic world in which there is this place called the Zone in like the center of like this concrete city, and a stalker, who's someone who like knows the Zone very well and like goes into it, leads these 2 other people into the Zone in search of this place in the Zone that supposedly like grants your not darkest, but like your deepest wishes and desires. I think this film looks so visually stunning. It's like this lush forest green everywhere, which again is like so chilling when you think about it as like this barbed wired off haven and like the center of this post-apocalyptic world. I think that the conversations that these men have, because like most of the film is kind of just like the 3 of them walking about and trying to get to this place, are so rich. This film has so much to say about like sacredness and sacred spaces and like quietude, and faith, because again there's something like almost mystical going on, but at the same time like the stalker clearly has such like a deep love for this place that I feel like he feels like is his, and like I think I love that notion of like spaces being yours and sacred spaces. I feel like this does kind of mix 2 of maybe like my favorite genres, like it's very human but it's also very philosophical, and it's beautiful. I feel so embarrassed. This is so silly. And now the big reveal, everyone. Big reveal time. My favorite film that I watched in all of 2020 is Frances Ha, directed by Noah Baumbach. Frances Ha is about a 27-year-old woman living in New York City with her best friend Sophie. Frances wants to be a dancer, but she's not very good at it. Her friend Sophie is moving out to go live with, I think, like her boyfriend. And Frances, she is annoying out there. She talks too much. When she tells stories, she doesn't realize that, like, you can leave a few details out, girl. Like, no one needs to know every single thing that's ever happened to you. She's impulsive. She has no idea what she wants to do with her life, but she is fundamentally a dreamer. I love this movie very dearly, and luckily I did get some thoughts on the nice camera. So let's go back to camera number 1 and we'll finish out this video.
There are like 1,000 reasons why this would resonate for me personally. I mean, I grew up on Long Island, about like 45 minutes from New York City, and this film takes place in New York City, and like, again, all of her personality quirks kind of feel like my personality quirks. But outside of that, I do feel like this is a really well-made movie. I think that the way it handles like this mix of drama and comedy, because I think that comedy arises best not from jokes but from life situations, and I think this film kind of constructs life situations that don't feel cheap but do feel intensely comedic. And I also think this is perhaps the best movie I've ever seen about female friendship. Frances and her best friend Sophie just have this like deep soul connection of love, and it's something that I don't see portrayed anywhere well enough. Like, I don't really know if I believe in soulmates or finding your person or anything, but I do think that this film cares about having a person and like having someone that knows you. And I think for Frances it matters that someone knows her, because she can be tough to be around, and that like when you find someone who feels close to your soul, hold on to them, is kind of one of the messages of this film, if you will. Those are my favorite films of 2020. This video is probably very long. Thank you for watching the entire thing. I hope you found some films that you can check out now. I love making videos about all things movies, music, and books. Please let me know if there's anything you specifically want to see from me, and I can make that content for you. Until then though, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.